meaning was unmistakable. So in this sense, media, when reporting on terrorism and terrorist acts, plays a key role. And for journalists, this leads to a number of problems and dilemmas. As journalists, we must balance the public right to know versus the privacy of those who are affected by violence and having sensitivity to their grieving process. We must consider our duty to inform our viewers or readers or listeners with the possibility that each time we broadcast a video of a terrorist or print the words of a terrorist, we risk furthering the terrorist cause and, as some would argue, contributing to the motivation of terrorists to stage even more spectacular attacks in the future. For example, in 2002, when the Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl was abducted and killed by militants in Pakistan, CBS decided to air a portion of the video filmed by his abductors. The reporter, Daniel Pearl, his father, said, quote, "Terrorists have made this video confident that the American media would broadcast it and thereby serve their exact purpose." So he objected to the video being shown. His father was making an important and legitimate point. But the TV network, CBS, and Dan Rather, the anchor, argued that airing the video in which Pearl's killers spoke of their anti-American philosophy helped to explain to viewers the motives behind their actions, and therefore it had news value in showing it to the public. Another example closer to home here is the coverage of the 3 men convicted of the Bali bombing in 2002 as they awaited execution. Watching the television news and reading the reports this past week, as I'm sure that many of you did as well, I often found myself asking questions. What is the purpose of another interview with the family members of these men? What more does another exclusive video from inside the jail cell in the island, prison island, tell us? Is it really newsworthy? Is it really of value? Both the Indonesian and international media have played a role in creating media stars out of these men. Yes, it is an important event, and the 3 men are an important part of the story. But we should always be careful about how we are approaching the subject of terrorism and what kind of angle we're taking. If the media's role is to better inform the public about the broader context of terrorism, it seems like we don't always do a good job. In the United States, directly after 9/11, September 11, the public experienced a variety of responses and emotions, but one of them was confusion. The common question, spoken also by President Bush to a joint session of Congress directly after the attacks, was, why do they, those who attacked America, why do they hate us? Why do they hate us? It was hard for many Americans who consider their country a symbol of freedom and justice in the world to imagine that others wanted to do them harm. In my view, this reaction to those attacks displays a tremendous ignorance. And for Bush to say it himself, I think, showed either a glaring lack of awareness of world politics or a deliberate refusal to recognize the often counterproductive and exploitative role that America does play in the world. But for much of the public, it was a genuine and sincere question. Why did they hate us? In the month following 9/11, the American media explored this topic. Major TV and radio networks broadcast a total of 33 stories dealing with the basic question of anti-American sentiment in the world. This is according to research by Bridget Nakos, a professor at Columbia University. This could to be seen as a positive role of media through informing the citizenry. However, this is important, in the 8 months before 9/11, that same media produced not one single story on the subject. As others have noted before, the headlines that preceded the attacks in 2001 were dominated by Britney Spears and a sex scandal involving a congressman in Washington, D.C. So you could argue that the public was not informed and prepared, and the media did not do its role. At least partly, the American media can be held responsible for this situation. As I said before, one of the reactions to 9/11 attacks was confusion. In other ways, the media seemed at times to do more to increase this confusion rather than contribute to clarity. In the months following 9/11, the media became obsessed with the possibility of another attack. The New York Times ran 76 stories on biological and chemical terror, 27 on the threat of anthrax. The Washington Post ran 55 stories on biological terror and 25 on anthrax. The coverage and the stories sent the public into a near panic. And from what we know now, the perpetrators of the anthrax crime were most likely domestic scientists from within the US government itself, not terrorists from another country. Reporting on terrorism is not just about getting the facts right when reporting on the event itself, but also the aftermath, the complex dynamics of the public's reaction to the events, the real possibilities of another attack, and the preparations that elected officials are taking to protect the public. All of these are positive roles that the media can play as well. Over the past few months that I've been here in this country, but especially during the last 2 weeks, many Indonesians have asked me, once they find out that I'm American, if I'm afraid to be reporting here. Afraid of what? Afraid of Muslims. Afraid of violence. Afraid of terrorism. Most recently, I was asked this question by Ustaz Waihuddin, the current director of the Nguruki School in Solo Central, Java. The Nguruki School, as many of you probably know, is renowned for producing a number of Jamaah Islamiyah members and for being co-founded by Abu Bakr Bashir. After an interview with Waihuddin, he turned to me and asked me this question: "Aren't you afraid to come here?" "Why?" I said. "Should I be afraid?" Now he laughed. But underlying all of these questions is the concept of terror. And that's the other part of this topic. Terror is what happens as a result of the terrorist act. It is the purpose of the act and the reaction that spreads across the public. And here, media also plays an important role. According to a May 2002 study by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 10.5%